Good evening, Canby. I'd like to welcome you to a public forum for our Parks and Recreation Master Plan update. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from our consultant team, who is led by Greenplay, and they are going to give us an update on their initial findings and also the results of the public opinion survey that was conducted towards the end of last year. So just a reminder, we are being televised tonight, and it'll be posted on YouTube later. So please mute your Zoom account if you could. Jeff Milt from our consultant team will go over their schedule for the evening, but there will be an opportunity for question and answers at the end. And also the Greenplay team will be monitoring the chat function. So go ahead and send them a chat and they will try to get to your questions at the end. So without further ado, and again, thank you for everyone for signing on. I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, good evening. Make sure I'm not muted. My name is Jeff Milkus. I'm actually out of Gresham, and I'm here with two colleagues that will introduce themselves in a few moments. We're here tonight for the second of three public meetings to discuss opportunities and findings from the master plan research that we've been doing in order to provide a kind of a blueprint or a path forward for the city relating to parks and recreation. This is what we call our findings presentation, and we will be providing information that we've learned, a summary of our public engagement. We'll be talking about what we call our level of service findings, where we visited parks and rated and graded different amenities and components within your parks, and a number of other things, as well as a significant survey that went to the community, and one of which we received a really good turnout on. Lots and lots of community members returned their surveys and really helped us a lot towards best understanding the needs and desires for parks and recreation in the community. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our more formal presentation. The way this will work is you'll have an opportunity for a question and answer period near the end of the presentation, as well as you can always go to the chat room, and within the chat room there's opportunities to direct questions, and we ask that you place your questions or comments in the chat room, and we will answer those as well as we can during the presentation, or particularly at the end. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. Just a moment. Of course, technical issues. I wouldn't go forward. Okay. We need to let you know that this is part of our community engagement process. And indeed, until the plan is formally accepted, approved, and adopted, we're looking for your input. And so at this point, decisions haven't been made. There are no recommendations to date. What we do have are what we've learned from you and others. So now our project team, again, I've introduced myself. Dave is with me. Dave Peterson, would you like to introduce yourself or wave hello? Okay. Art Thatcher is with us from Greenplay / Barry Dunn. We've had a merger with our firm with another great firm since we started the project. So we're kind of referencing both, but we are still, we consider this project really a Greenplay project still. Okay, we'll move to our next. Our overall plan goals are to provide, again, a comprehensive plan, something that is easily implementable for the community, easy to understand, not a plan that'll end up on the shelf, but one that can be used to help really guide the Parks and Recreation program. We'll also be creating a system development charge methodology, redoing the existing methodology and making recommendations for what the maximum or opportunities are within system development and land dedication. We won't be talking very much about that tonight, but we have presented that to the advisory board here in the past. This is where we're at, in hopes that we'll get a plan to the finish line sometime in the April timeframe. We started with a strategic kickoff. We moved into specific stakeholder engagement. We did a survey, a full needs assessment survey. We've looked at all of the parks. We've done background research into recreation opportunities, into park maintenance efficiencies, into the organizational structure or potential structure, and as well as analysis of finances for a potential Parks and Recreation department. We'll be moving from here into what we call our draft or action plan kind of mode. We'll be crafting goals, objectives, and action items, and then moving into a final plan that the advisory board, that the community, and that the elected city council then could adopt. Okay, we'll take a look at the public engagement process first. Very pleased to see. We spoke with, when we started this process, a number of focus groups, a number of stakeholders. We interviewed people. We spoke to folks from the school district. We spoke to folks from sports user groups, from community members at large. From there, we took information that we learned and we crafted a survey. And that survey became two different pieces, two different surveys in a sense, or two different modes of the same survey. One, a random invitation survey that we set out to try to attract people that were users, but also our best opportunity for people that may not be using the parks or may not be using the swim center or such. We also then encouraged people in the community at large to complete an open link survey, which was open to everyone. In total, we ended up with 1,213 different individuals that gave us input into the master planning process. Into the demographics of the city. We noticed that in 2000, there was just under 14,000 people. Currently, with the current census data, we ended up with an estimate or a number of 18,952. We're now looking forward into 2026 with growth to 19,907. Demographics, although we take our information, we source it from Esri Business Analyst, demographics is never a complete, completely accurate in terms of actual head counts. We hope that it's as close as we can possibly get. We know that there are other demographic studies that are slightly different, but still similar. So we looked at the age of residents in Canby, and we realized a couple of different things. You'll notice that the dark green lines on your screen are represent people within the city of Canby. The next level of green, you might say, are people in the state of Oregon, and then the lighter green is USA. So you can see that the younger populations in Canby are significantly more in terms of percentages, or at least greater than Oregon and the USA. At the same time, you can see that older populations have actually decreased and are trending toward decreasing over on the right side of your screen. These are important items to know because it affects decisions that could be made toward what are priorities for certain programs and activities and different kinds of recreational opportunities or parks. So we looked at the ethnic character of the city, and we realized that there are, if you look through, there are individuals of a white background, 78%. You can see the numbers here. There are other races at 14%, Asian at 1%. not many Black or African Americans as a percentage. However, we do realize that there is a certain heritage, Hispanic heritage within the community that amounts to 23%. Just to remind you, Hispanic heritage may self-report, individuals of Hispanic background may self-report as any number of different ethnic backgrounds, depending on where they're from. Clackamas County ranked 4th out of 34 Oregon counties in health outcomes, which is really good. So it's the area here could be considered throughout the county to be a little healthier than others. We looked at individuals with disabilities and came to the kind of the realization that about 12% of individuals in Canby live with some form of a disability. And you can see on the right there where those kind of are made up. You can see that there's a number with hearing difficulties, a number with ambulatory difficulties, and the like. We looked at trends throughout the area and the community and compare fitness participation, say, and we realized that that in Oregon, walking, for instance, is very, very popular, but it's more popular slightly in the city than in the rest of the state. And you can see there, swimming is popular, weightlifting is popular, and there's a number of different ones there. We looked at outdoor participation from the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation program. It's a report that's published by the state. Walking on local streets and sidewalks was far and away the most popular of outdoor participation. Walking on trails and paths, second, sightseeing and such, and the list you can see goes down the list. What's important here is that this isn't specific to just to Canby, that really walking for pleasure is generally seen as one of the most, if not the most important outdoor participation activities. In terms of team sports, we look and you can see that Canby's a little higher than the state in basketball, a little lower in soccer, but for the most part, the trends from the state mirror, or from Canby mirror the state. But by the way, before I go on, I might mention that there is a lot of information and a lot of data in this presentation. And the intention, the reason that we've included so much is because it will serve as a resource. The presentation will be posted to the city webpage after we finish the presentation here in the near future. So I'm looking at sports trends, and you can see there are some things like stand-up paddling and kayaking that are really growing. There are areas like pickleball, and we know, Maple Street, we've got a new pickleball court coming online, and it's in response, of course, to the growing need for pickleball resources, and you can see where the percentage is there. We can look at things like team sports over the last 5 years, rugby, baseball, swimming team. Those have continued to increase fairly significantly, while there are some that have gone down. Touch football, fast pitch softball is slightly decreased. So while we worked with the public engagement process, we had some themes that arrived and kind of bubbled to the top, is the way I look at it. Sports facilities were addressed by you and the community as being really important, and that's has to do with both availability and maintenance. Needs for a community recreation program, perhaps a department with a professional staff. Basically, advocates and leaders for parks and recreation. Connected trails, walking opportunities, Waite Park and Community Park needing an upgrade or upgrades and potential additional planning efforts or master plans, concept plans for those parks, and of course pickleball. And as I said, your pickleball court is, or courts are on the way. Top activities that we ask folks about: summer camps, community education, community enrichment programs, farmers markets, enrichment classes, winter activities, Saturday markets. Of interest here is that we do know that there are a fairly good number of Canby families that are enrolling in enrichment programs, both in Wilsonville and in Oregon City. We suspect that there's a significant number enrolling in the city of Portland, and we're looking into what those numbers might be at the same time. We ask folks about their priorities and their vision, and ask about, what's really important to you. Well, perhaps a community center or a sports complex, again, to master plan Waite Park or community park, better sports field maintenance, the collaborative relationship with the Canby School District, very important priority, aquatic opportunities, park maintenance and swim center funding, somewhat permanent. Those were all priorities that were listed. Here's a few more. A formal department for recreation or parks and recreation, more connectivity, meaning trails connected to parks. There were themes and priorities to assist or to suggest that Locust Street Park has a lot of demand on it and may need additional park opportunities within the area or additional components. And we know that things are happening at Locust Street Park as well. Again, pickleball and a dog park. When we ask folks about what are the top components and amenities that they would desire, community center with sports fields, again, dog stations, dog parks, off-leash areas, greater access to the Willamette River, swim center renovation. They talked about non-motorized boat users, meaning kayaks or rafts and the like, turf fields, inclusive play structures. You can see the list continues, but also that the themes are starting to show throughout the engagement process. So now we'll take a moment and we'll jump over to the survey and talk specifically about what we learned from the 1,200 and so folks that took part in the overall process, and the majority being the surveys. So the statistically valid survey, again, we mailed a postcard, 3,400 people. We received, or we returned, we mailed an additional 3,400 surveys to those same individuals. So they received two things in the mail from us. We received 777 of those invitation surveys back for a fairly small margin of error. So we would suggest that there is opportunity here to accept the survey responses and certainly to act upon them. They were representative of the community. We also received, again, 335 open link surveys. Interestingly enough, when we compared the results of the two surveys, they were fairly close in terms of the responses that we received. So here's some demographics. Again, this is just representative of those that returned the survey. 53% were regular park users, 65% were trail users. So we received a number of surveys from folks that didn't necessarily use the parks or the trails. We understood that 12% need ADA services, right along, and that's right on key with the representation from the demographic study. We also noted that 55% of people north of 99E of the dividing highway own a dog, while 45% south own a dog. So there is a greater percentage of dog ownership in the north part of the city. Of the respondents, 15% were Hispanic and 90% were registered voters. So now we'll move into the area where we ask people to help us to understand what's really important to you. And again, you'll notice that the overall survey and the invite survey didn't really differ, and certainly didn't differ significantly. But again, trails and pathways, natural areas, and open space was very important. City parks, of course, amenities at those parks. The Molalla River State Park, which we know is obviously not a city park, but it does provide a certain level of service to the community. Athletic fields, special events, and the swim center. This was on a scale of 1 to 5. And so any responses that were between 4 and 5 as an average is pretty important to the community. If your responses average was over 3 or 3 to 4, it doesn't mean that it wasn't important, but not quite as important as the top items. And you'll see that the adult center rated a little bit lower than 3 in this case. So then we ask, okay, we know what's important to you. How is the city doing in meeting these needs? Well, the adult center, although it was the least important, was certainly certainly represented the needs of the community most. So that's a good sign. City parks, trails and pathways, natural areas, to the extent that they can kind of match up, it means that the city is recognizing what's important and meeting those most important needs. There's some areas down here at the bottom that are still still meeting the needs, athletic courts, athletic fields, amenities at parks, and those are still okay numbers. When you get to 3.5 on up, you're showing that the needs are fairly well met. So then we looked at some other priorities, and we wanted to break out the priorities between individuals of overall in the community and individuals of Hispanic background. We wanted to do this intentionally because we know that you've got a significant number of, over 20% of your community of folks that identify as Hispanic, and we wanted to make sure that those priorities are well known to the city decision makers. So you can see on the right, we put the Hispanic population numbers in order so that we can, I take that back. We put the non-Hispanic ones in order so you can make a good comparison. But additional facilities and amenities, Hispanic population felt that was much more important to them. Lighting was much more important. Interestingly, improved safety and security was twice as important to people of Hispanic background than non-Hispanic background. Wi-Fi connectivity was again twice as important. Better access for individual disabilities was fairly high. And then near the bottom, you see some other things aren't quite as important. But overall, the top items here, the top 4 or 5, are areas that really overall can be considered as really top priorities. Additional shade at the parks, and we know from community engagement that came not only there, but at the skate park as well. So we'll move to the next. So then we ask what 3 future needs would be most important to people in your home. Well, if you don't have the option of selecting a whole bunch or a number of these items and then allowing your priorities to show that way, it's a little more difficult when we ask you to shave it down to 3 in a sense. But the city trail system, a dog park, and river access on the Willamette River were really the top 3. If you look at the invite sample, that might be a little more important in this case. Those numbers tracked as well, 1, 2, and 3. So then we asked people in your community about communication, and we didn't receive any surprises here. Overall, it looks as though the community would like much more engagement and communication about parks and recreation. Well, remember, as I think probably everyone on the Zoom call tonight knows, Canby has a healthy park system, but not necessarily an organized formal recreation program that is rolled out in the way that many other cities would typically do. In other words, without having a recreation and parks department, it's a little more difficult to publish the kind of materials and communicate in the same way. But overall, from the invite sample and from the overall, you're looking at about 56% of individuals that feel like communication is a little bit not as effective as it could be, and a very small number of folks there at the bottom, 12%, feel there is sufficient communication. So we went further and we asked people, tell us about what your communication methods are. How do you know? How do you learn about things, special events or different park opportunities? Well, they hear by word of mouth, friends and family members, a little bit by social media, and then local media. So when we then try to compare what are your preferred methods, we learned that really social media is still the same, but email blasts are one way that folks would really like to hear. Part of communication from a Parks and Recreation Department has typically been a program guide or a program brochure. And since the city doesn't publish one, that was noticeably absent from this survey. We also asked, can we break out the way that people would like communication between overall and individuals of Hispanic background? And as it turns out, social media is much more effective, according to the survey respondents, for individuals of Hispanic background. So then we ask about overall population. And I apologize, or areas for improvement, for the busyness of this slide. This is very, very busy. But again, we really wanted to make this data available in an easy format for you and the remainder of the rest of your community, and it will be published on your webpage. So when we ask people about, what are your areas for improvement? What areas could the city do over the next 5 to 10 years? And we also then compared it with whether you were reported as individual of Hispanic heritage or not. You could see creating a connected trail system, better maintenance of existing parks and facilities, and acquiring land for new parks, all kind of bubbled to the top. And you see that there aren't many differences there between the overall and the Hispanic heritage area. There are some, but they're not overall very significant. I would say probably upgrading or renovating Community Park is one that kind of floats to the top a little bit for individuals of Hispanic background. So then we ask, like we did the other, tell us which are your 3 areas that the city can do. What can they improve if you have to limit yourself to those 3? Creating a connected city trail system, a dog park, and access on the Willamette River. No surprise, the same as the priority items that were shown to be important. Okay, so now we know a little bit about needs met and what the priorities are for the community. Now we looked at how could we possibly pay for these in terms of long-term improvements. And you can see overall, folks are interested in bonds, interested in private-public partnerships. If you're over 3.5%, you're probably pretty close. Recognize, please, that folks who are registered voters track the same as the overall survey, are fairly close to it, meaning that we wouldn't recommend or suggest right now that a bond referendum for specific projects would be able to pass right out the door. But this is a really good jumping off point to say, yeah, I think there's probably room for additional inquiry and research and potential opportunities to really look into what those projects might be and polling and things like that, leading up to opportunity to increase your parks and recreation system. We did learn that increased property taxes are really not altogether too popular. I think that probably tracks the sentiment throughout the state. So then we did ask about support for swimming center and maintenance fees. And as you know, there are fees that are revolving that have to go back to voters every, I think, 5 years or so to be re-upped in a sense to continue to support the city's park maintenance and to support the swim center. And overall, folks within the survey said, yeah, they would be okay supporting. In fact, the open link at 64% is a very significant number in terms of this kind of survey research. How you can get from A to B with Oregon's tax system is another discussion and may lead to opportunities with the special district that is in play here. But those are other discussions, I guess, for a later time. So now we'll move over to our investigation into what are your parks like and the such. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Peterson.
Oops, yeah, you're muted. I'll use mine.
If you give me just a moment, I need to mute my screen or mute my microphone.
The host muted you. I'm still muted. I apologize, just a moment.
Okay.
Mute. I am now muted. Maybe I have to do yours. It's fine.
We cannot hear you. You're muted still.
Yeah, no sound.
How about now?
Yep.
All right, I'll start over. So we were out in August and visited all your parks. We created a digital map, a GIS map of all your parks. We also included the schools and some alternative providers like the fairgrounds, Knightsbridge Park, and even the state park. Again, just to get a sense of kind of what was available to people in Canby as far as recreation opportunities. These are a few of the things that we saw when we were out in the parks. We took a lot of pictures. And really these observations that we had fit pretty close to what we just heard in the survey that Jeff presented. We did note that you had some new park signage, and it would be great to continue that across the system. It seemed like a good asset that really helps identify what are Canby parks versus those alternative providers. At that time, we really thought that there was a lack of a dog park in the system. There seemed to be heavy reliance on the schools to supplement service, especially in terms of sports fields and sports courts. There seemed to be a need for some ADA access within the parks. Seemed to be something that could be a focus. A need to replace some of the playgrounds in the system. And then ultimately to ensure that any new development that comes into Canby is providing walkable access to a neighborhood park. So we don't want to bring in a lot more residents without adding that walkable level of service or walkable access to a park. Again, we looked at some of these alternative providers, including the schools, state and county parks, and we even found a few HOA tennis courts and such kind of out in the community. We created a map, a digital map of each park we took an iPad with and located all of the components in the park. So we're really interested in what there was to do in each of the parks. So was there a a playground or a tennis court or a picnic shelter, maybe a piece of open turf where you could go kick the ball or throw the frisbee, if you will. All those types of things were recorded and given a quality score, so we knew if they were high scoring components or possibly components that needed to be fixed up, renovated. We also know from research that there's certain things that you can put in a park that help residents be more comfortable or extend the stay at a park. And those are things like drinking fountains and restrooms, you can imagine, may allow you to stay longer at a park. So those things are all recorded also. Ultimately, what we're doing is creating a scorecard for each park. And this is an example of the map and the scorecard for Community River Park. Once we create this database, we're able to sort that database. And this is just an example that you can sort for such things as where are all the playgrounds in Canby and how did they score. Ultimately, we're able to rank all these parks, and there's no real ultimate score for any park, but just really how relative they are to each other. And in this case, Maple Street Park scores the highest because it has the most things going on. It has the most things that you can go do within a single park in town. And then you'll notice at the bottom, some of those parks that are underdeveloped or yet to be developed score pretty low. So again, there's no real ultimate score, but just relative to each other. We can also compare to our national data set. We have almost 30,000 parks in our data set, or components in our data set, about 5,000 parks, 81 similar types of agencies, if you will. And in this case, Maple Street Park scores fairly high in that overall database. We can also compare Canby to other kind of similar size communities. And we see that on the top row is that Canby has, in comparison, very comparable number of locations and parks per 1,000 people, but it scores low kind of in the development of those parks. And that's probably directly related to all those parks that were at the bottom of that list that scored pretty low. The National Recreation Parks Association also keeps park metrics for similar sized communities. And again, here's a comparison. There really is no standard, but just allows you to compare to what other communities may be doing as far as, number of diamond fields, number of community gardens, basketball courts, kind of all those types of things. And we see that Canby is a little bit on the lower side in most of those categories. We really wanted to look at the system. It seemed like walkability was probably a key focus maybe of Canby and people accessing. We saw in the survey that people were really interested in walking for exercise and walking around town. In this case, we look at walkability as it pertains to major pedestrian barriers. So what are those elements that people may not walk across to get to a park on the other side? That could be the river, it could be major highways, major streets, those types of things. So we tried to identify those elements as we looked at the walkability for Canby. In this case, we've taken all of those park scores and created a heat map. And on these heat maps, the darker the orange, the higher the level of service. So anywhere where there's really dark orange elements, those people have access to more and better parks in those neighborhoods. We see a few concentrations of darker orange. In fact, the darkest orange is there on about 9th and Jupiter, I guess is what I calculated. If you see that red star right there, a resident that lives in that area and access 6 different Canby parks. In those parks are 26 different components. So there may be a playground or a tennis court or a piece of open turf. Again, any of those types of things. And you can see Maple Street, which was the highest scoring park, is accessible from that area. There's also 9 other components at 4 alternative providers, the school and the fairgrounds. So again, just gives you an example of what that level of service means. What can I access from where I live by walking? What those orange gradient maps don't tell us is what should that level of service be. We know we're not going to build Maple Street Park in every neighborhood, but what should every resident of Canby have walkable access to? In this case, we consider approximately 3 different components, and possibly access to the logging road trail, because we also heard again in the survey that was really important, that people have access to trails. And so again, access to 3 different components. That could be a playground, it could be a picnic shelter, it could be a piece of open turf, it could be a basketball court, and if any of those 3 different things. In this case, people that live in a purple area have access, have met that target number. People that live in a yellow area may have access to something, but not quite at that level of at least 3 components. In gray areas, people need to go further than a 10-minute walk to get to those types of recreation components. It's also interesting when we can pull the demographics on those purple, yellow, and gray areas, and we see that 87% of residents live in that target area. Only 12% are a little bit underserved, and only 1% live in that gray area. And I think this is something that Canby really should celebrate, is that the fact that people live that close to a decent park. We can also look at level of service based on more of a neighborhood level. So what do I have within 1 mile? Again, similar type of analysis, only this time looking at a 1 mile. It may be a longer walk. It could be a bike ride. It could be getting in your car and driving. And we see that 100% of Canby lives within a target area at the 1 mile radius. One last thing we looked at was interested in what percentage of children in Canby are within a 10-minute walk of a playground. And so that's a park with a playground or a school with a playground. In this case, we found that 83% of children aged 0 to 14 lived within walking distance of a playground. The 2 areas that we circled from aerial photography appeared to be more residential areas and probably comprise most of the 17% of children that do not live within walking distance of a playground. So that may be a goal in the future, is to provide walkable level service to a playground to those kids. Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Next steps. What we've provided you tonight is what we've learned to date in terms of interactions with the public. Again, we've done a number of other research opportunity, or taken on a number of other research opportunities in the recreation area, finance, in organizational structure, looked at background, looked at other planning documents. There's quite a bit that's been happening in the background as well. But tomorrow we'll be taking the key issues that we heard from you and heard in the survey, and really the level of service information that David provided, and a number of other sources, and attempt to vision what would it look like? What would the goals for the city begin to look like? What would the objectives be? And really, what are the action items? What is it that in terms of actionable opportunities, what is it that the city should prioritize in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, long-term, mid-term, short-term? What will that cost, and what does a capital investment or capital improvement program look like? So we'll start with that visioning workshop actually tomorrow with staff, and then start to move to writing and completing the draft plan, looking at what cost estimates are for capital and operating for each of the items that we'll be looking at or potentially recommending, and then move to a final plan, which would come back to the community which would come back in a similar public forum as this. When we present the draft plan, it will definitely come to the advisory board and on its way to the city council for approval and then adoption. So that's the next steps. That's what, where we're moving on this. This is our contact information. If you'd like to follow up or look at the phone numbers, and we can collect email at those addresses. What we'd like to do now is to move into the question and answer. If there are some questions or things that individuals are interested, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all kind of see. And again, if you do, raise your hand electronically or individually, and we'll call on you to the extent that we can see. We have a lot of participation tonight. And so it looks like over 50 people. Might be a little challenging if we don't see you waving your hand. Again, the electronic raised hand in Zoom works well. So with that said, if there are any questions, otherwise you can ask them in the chat room and we'll pull them right out of the chat and we'll go from there. I have a colleague with me that's monitoring the chat room. Art, do we have any questions? Nope. No chat questions. There's quite a few people here that do not have cameras, so we can't see. So you'd have to, again, electronically raise your hand. I think it's possible, or go into the chat room. And looking, I don't see any. Yeah, or questions or comments.
Got one from, how often should these plans be updated? Every 5 or every 10 years?
Okay, well, cities differ in their approach. Some I've seen every 3 years. Some I've seen that have put it on the back burner and not updated them for well more than 10 years. Really, I think 5 years is a good point to kind of shoot for. It allows you to set up a capital improvement program that's in line with your budgets on the year that the year after the plan is adopted, and kind of follow that through that 5 years. The planning horizon, we look at 5 years, but we also consider what's happening a little bit longer. Is there another chat question?
Yes. So a while back, there was some work done on renovating the Legacy Park area into a sports complex. Is that still on the horizon?
To answer that, I'm going to ask, I hope I don't put him on the spot, Ryan Potter with the city, if he knows. This occurred before we started our project.
Yeah, I think the commenter is maybe talking about the Ackerman project that was, which is directly adjacent to Legacy Park, and that's a property that's owned by the school district. But obviously, the school district has partnered with the city on a variety of things over the years, and I think that's definitely something that's still in the mix. I know, including from the feedback from the survey that we heard tonight, that athletics facilities are a major thing that people are looking for, and so I don't think there's imminent plans right now to build any facilities there, but I think it's definitely in the mix of things that the city will contemplate looking forward, especially as we collaborate more with the school district.
Thank you, Ryan. Any other questions in the chat room? That I think this works better from our perspective. If you can type in your questions, please, we'll try to respond to them. Or comments, things that maybe we might have missed, things that you'd like to see us look at. All of those things are important.
All right, so from Jeff, the last plan that I saw had a connection from Logging Road Trail to downtown. Is that being considered to move forward?
Yeah. I can tell you that in our research, we know that connectivity between the parks and the trails is important. We haven't gotten to that point in the research yet to be able to tell you whether yes or no on that as a formal recommendation, unless there are others on the call that have more background information than we do.
And the trucks ship things that people need shipped, like across the country. Yeah.
So Robert Camray, you have your hand up. You have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was just curious, when you looked at the parks, especially like the Echo Park, did you guys evaluate the pickleball component of those parks and things like that, their viability and their suitability? The frisbee cart in the Echo Park. Did you guys evaluate that?
We evaluated the park area itself, but that's really the next step that
Okay,
we're working toward.
thank you.
Yeah, where would things be appropriate? Where would infill opportunities lend themselves? Where we know where there are gaps in the system, but we need then to move forward into the next step.
So we have another question from one of the commissioners, and I apologize, it doesn't give me your whole name, so that's why I'm just saying commissioner. How many cities that you've worked with in the past of Canby's size rely so heavily on schools for parks and recreation activities?
Well, I think I can take a short stab at that. We've done approximately 650 different kinds of plans over the last 20 some years, and a significant number of those were for small cities, perhaps smaller than Canby. There are a number of those. It's not. I guess the point I'm making is it's not unusual for small cities to rely on schools for either physical space to put programs in or athletic facilities.
In fact, it's pretty normal for most communities to have joint use agreements with the school system, the school district, especially for use of their parks and their athletic facilities. As the community looks at those spaces, the community considers them to be public spaces. And so many have joint use agreements for use of those facilities after school hours and on the weekends. So it is very common nationwide. And then let's see, Mike Dunleavy, how are collaboration efforts between the school district and Parks and Recreation currently? Is there a strategy to enhance those efforts?
I'm going to ask Canby staff member Jeff Snyder if he could talk a little bit about the agreements with the school for athletic fields. I think you might have more up-to-date information than I.
Yeah, at this point, the city of Canby utilizes a volunteer group called Canby Kids, who has rights to the school fields and city fields, and they do all of the scheduling, and actually they do some of the maintenance of the infields, and that's how we're operating right now. So I usually meet with one person from each sport that has anything to do with the city. I'm sure they do the same thing with the school district. So Canby Kids is the go-between at this point.
Thank you, Jeff, for that. Other question?
So we have a question from Jeff and Robin. Will the new housing developments off the territorial Holly have a park for families?
Yeah, and I can answer that one. The new subdivision that's up there, Dog's Farm, did not dedicate park space, but that's partially because the city actually does own a parcel right there directly north of that new subdivision that doesn't have plans right this moment to be a park, but it is set aside for a future park. And I do know that Green Play's analysis did include that property in their inventory. And so that next time you're out there, it's off Locust, so directly north of that new subdivision. There's a long, skinny parcel there that will be a future park.
Dod's place on the map.
I think. Dodd's Place on the map, Ryan?
Yeah, there's a couple different names. Some people call it the Simnett property, that parcel. Dodd's Place is the subdivision that's under construction now between Holly and Locust. So that's north of Territorial.
These are great questions. Thank you for chiming in. Are there more? Wait a moment and see.
I was gonna say, I don't see any hands. Don't see any questions.
I had a question. I have my hand up. I don't know if you can see.
Okay, Eric?
Yeah. So I'll try to keep my comments brief. I didn't hear anyone say the word tree. And so I kind of I'm surprised. I'm the only certified arborist in Canby, by the way. And I don't know, I also didn't hear anyone say urban forestry. So for just the city council and, you know, people who are in charge of the city, I think it's good to think in 21st century terms and make good policies, thinking 50 years ahead. So plant some trees because you love kids. So, you know, looking at the surveys, it looked like athletic fields were lower than walking trails. And I think people go outside to enjoy nature. So, you know, we've talked about turf for a long time, and I'd rather see trees planted than a bunch of plastic laid out. So that's my opinion.
Eric, well, thank you. That's very insightful. Just because things may not have risen to the consciousness of our survey responses or community engagement, doesn't mean that they're not also included in our discussion for potential action items. One of the things we base action items on are, say, the city's comprehensive plan and other previous planning documents. And I know that there is information on particularly tree canopy and the like, and that'll all be considered for sure.
So James Walton has asked, adjacent to Timber Park, opposite Baker Prairie Fields, is an open field that was included in your green space map. I believe it's owned by the school district. Are there plans to develop that into a park?
I'm not familiar with exactly where that is. Ryan?
I don't believe so. I believe Green Play just included that in their inventory because it was considered a supplemental recreational amenity that's either available or partially available to people in Canby. And the Green Play team might be able to talk more on this, but they actually did include quite a few non-city facilities or spaces on their inventory, but I believe they did kind of separate them into different classes between the ones the city actually controls and the other available amenities.
That's right. And I guess we need to remember that when we started, there was really, there was really no GIS. This was kind of created from scratch. So we did try to differentiate between school properties, Canby properties, and maybe even these other providers. So if there's specific edits like that need to be made, we can make those. But again, it was really about identifying all those things that people in Canby may have access to that are on a public basis, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
Also from Mindy, Logging Road connection to 99E is in both 2010 Parks Plan and TSP.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy. I've reviewed the trails plan that I've seen in the parks plan, and absolutely will consider those.
Given your high priority on people's reactions that they want to walk and they want to have trails to get out and have recreation along those lines, are you going to evaluate our ability to be a walkable community and a bikeable community, where just to be able to walk on our streets safely and ride bikes safely throughout our community?
I think I can take a stab at that. We looked at the barriers to getting to and from different parks, but the sidewalks, the transportation network is not something really within our, for lack of other words, scope of responsibility with this particular study. We do recognize that it's really important having a plan for safe transportation to parks is certainly something that we look at and certainly something we may recommend. But the actual, we need, sidewalk plan and such is kind of another topic for another day.
And Bruce has asked, are the concepts in the old emerald necklace idea used in the thinking of the connectivity of the paths, i.e. to encompass the town with trails, making use of the logging road, Echo Park, City Park, Devil's Elbow, Molalla River Park, etc.?
I would certainly think absolutely they need to be. Ryan, can you elaborate at all on the recent history of the emerald necklace idea?
Yeah, so the emerald necklace idea is the idea that we would, in the long term, kind of around the perimeter of the city, have a circular trail system that would connect into some of the larger regional trails around us. So yeah, that's certainly, it showed up in Canby visioning. It showed up in our TSP and our old comp plan, and a lot of our plans done for the last 15 years or so have all mentioned it. So I would think that concept would probably make its way into this plan too. We definitely heard during the public engagement process that a lot of people in town still see a lot of value in that, and from a staff level we see that too. From the planning side, we obviously, as subdivisions come in that are on the perimeter of the city, especially right now on the southern edge of the city, we have developers dedicate pieces of that'll eventually tie in. So I think that'll remain a high priority.
I have another question. Do sidewalks fall under the TSP, or what plan would they be a part of? From Commissioner Patton.
Ryan, I'm not certain. There are certain kinds of transportation kind of corridors that need to be considered if you update or within the TSP, but I don't know. Can you shed light on
Yeah,
that?
I think we are heading into a TSP update in the near future, and I think that is one of the places we'll add a lot of focus that we maybe didn't in the past. Oh, I'm sorry. Someone has also just commented just now, what is TSP? That's the Transportation System Plan. So that's sort of our foundational document that cities have in Oregon that lays out, where your streets are now, where they're planned for the future, where truck routes are, and then they also address pedestrian circulation and bicycle circulation. So, so sidewalks, like Jeff said, there is a lot of synergy between trails and paths and sidewalks. Green Play's work on this particular parks master plan is maybe not focusing at a really low level on that for each street, how to get to parks. They're looking at it in more of a programmatic way. But I suspect that our goals and objectives in the final document would certainly have goals and objectives that address sidewalks and connectivity. But I do think, since we are going into a comp plan update and TSP update in the near future, I think there's a lot of opportunities for delving more into that subject.
I'd like to just make the comment, one less comment about sidewalks. We're just looking at them as connectivity issues. I would argue that sidewalks is a recreational activity use too. My wife and I put in 7 to 8, 1,000 steps a day, just walking the streets. And some streets are hazardous. And so they are a recreational opportunity. Just like a park. It's just a different looking park.
Thank you for that. It's very, very insightful.
Mindy's comment is advantageous to include sidewalks in both parks plan and TSP. Agree. And then Commissioner Patton, did AG land reserves for things like community gardening and open space register at all with those that filled out the survey?
Okay. Community gardening did show up in the survey as well as a number of times in the comments. We received, in addition to the survey, the kind of close-ended survey responses. We ended up with quite a few open-ended survey comments, and I think there were some on community gardening. I don't know that agricultural land specifically was commented on, though. Okay. Next question. Give you a moment to think about a few more.
Eric's got his hand up again.
Okay. Eric?
Maybe I'd like to turn things around and ask if we could hear from some members of the city council or the parks committee or bike and pedestrian, kind of understand their process. And it doesn't seem like we're seeing a master plan draft document yet. So maybe that's the next step, is we can review that and give some further comments. Is that right?
For this plan, absolutely. there'll be opportunity with the draft plan for community members, for staff, the individuals throughout the community to comment on it. Absolutely. Yeah, no, there isn't a draft plan as of yet. We're still gathering information.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity for development and improvement, but there's not funding, right? That's the problem.
And that's part of what we'll have to consider when we create the look at the goals and objectives and action items. What's really implementable? What's possible? Well, let's look and see. Do one last run around the chart here and see if I see any other hands up.
Jacob has asked, are there areas around the city that you are targeting to acquire land for new parks, such as ball fields?
I wouldn't say we're at the point of targeting any particular land as of yet, but we do know where gaps will be, and we'll be making those. We'll be looking at those prior to making recommendations. So we'll know that if there are areas in particular part of the city where there are not ball fields or are deficient in terms of parks and park components, that those are the areas we need to look at specifically.
Very similar to the playground analysis we ran. I guess that's the type of analysis or look you would take of the community, for those specific questions.
Yeah.
The big question on fields is do people want fields within walking distance, or are they able to drive, or they expect to drive to a complex so they can have multiple games at the same time, type of approach. So fields are a little bit different than say playgrounds or kicking the ball or throwing the frisbee. Being able to organize small tournaments or league games at a single complex may be to an advantage of the city.
So, wow, got some questions rolling in. So, let's see, Commissioner Patton, has there been any headway made on moving the boundary lines of the Parks and Recreation District? It has been talked about, but I have not heard how it is progressing.
I know that it is a discussion item. It's we've heard a lot about it. Ryan, do you have an update on maybe where that's at, or are there others? I just don't know where that process is.
I know it's in progress. I don't want to put them on the spot. I do think someone that's been working on that is on the call right now. But I'm not really comfortable speaking for exactly. I know they're working with the county on getting that accomplished, but I'm not exactly sure where it is right now.
I will tell you that that particular district, although it does not have a taxing authority at this point, could still be a really great asset for building and picking up Parks and Recreation and really improving the levels of service. It's a real opportunity. It's the best way I think I can put that.
So Jason Walton, just a big thank you to the Parks Department in general. Really appreciate all the efforts keeping our existing parklands maintained in an excellent condition. Thank you, James. And then from Mike Dunleavy, is anyone engaging with the large businesses that have moved in and will be moving in for donations to help fund some of the initiatives?
from our perspective in writing the plan, remember the survey information rated public-private partnerships as the top funding mechanism. And so certainly that will be recommended or suggested in the master plan. Down the road, how that comes to be may be just a little different story based on the individual park or asset or component or what have you that needs to be initiated.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I'm not sure that we've specifically worked with large organizations or large industries coming in on donations, but they do pay system development charges, so it's roughly proportional to the business coming in. But some of the large industrial projects that have come into the Pioneer Industrial Park have paid quite substantial SDCs. Those go into the pot for money that we use to build new facilities.
Okay, well, we don't see any other questions, but before we start to wrap it up, I do have a question for everyone. If you could please go in the chat room or the chat area, and if you were watching or participating tonight with another individual other than just yourself, so if there's 2 of you or 3 of you or 4 of you, could you kindly place that number in the chat room? And just all you have to do is put 2 and enter or 3 and enter. This gives us a little more accurate view into exactly how many community members are participating. We like to kind of memorialize that within the plan so everybody knows that it was a community effort. So we appreciate that. Again, if you have more than just yourself, we know what the total number of folks are that joined in originally. So
Good turnout.
yeah, very good turnout. So if there are not any other questions, we'll hang on for a few minutes for you to put that in. Eric, you've got another question. You're muted though.
Sorry, I know the purpose of this is to have participation, so I'm not trying to overrepresent the community all by myself. I just wanted to say, I really would appreciate it if the city would kind of take on a forward-looking policy to chip branches and produce mulch that could be used at the parks rather than incinerate the branches. Even if there's an exceptional ice storm, I just think it's not the best policy, although it probably helps people get rid of their branches for free. So it's like maybe a nice small town community thing, but just be really great if we could come up with a better way to deal with it next time.
Yeah, many cities, when trees go down or there's storm damage, chip on site and keep the outcome of that chipping, the bark and such, right into their parks and use them as mulch. Works very well and helps keep weeds down, and there's a number of other, it's very sustainable. I don't know the situation specifically in Canby, but it certainly is it's definitely a good, what am I trying to think of, practice. Yeah, best practice. Thanks, Dave. Okay, are there any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, well, we want to thank you all for being part of this tonight. This was an excellent turnout and really, really a critical piece of our research. We received lots of comments from you, and the questions were all very good. What we'll be doing is writing the plan, getting it drafted and edited, and at the point after we get it ready to come for community comment, then we will be hosting another one of these public forums, and we'd encourage and invite all of you to return. That plan, you'll have an opportunity in advance to review it, and that will be what we call our, for lack of other words, our draft plan public forum. And that'll take place probably some point in March is my hope and desire. So thank you all very much. And if there's nothing else, we're going to go ahead and sign off and be respectful of your time. We know we're 8 minutes early, which is great. Canby, thank you so much for being here tonight.